The rain fell in a relentless grey torrent, obscuring the grim majesty of Blackwood Hall. From the swaying confines of the postchaise, Eleanor Hartwell watched the brooding estate rise from the mist like a beast rousing from slumber. It was not a welcoming sight. Its crenellated towers speared the low-hanging clouds, and the ancient oak doors looked as though they hadn't opened for a smile in a century. It was the perfect residence, she thought with a dry, inward sigh, for the infamous Duke of Blackwood. A man more often described as forbidding than fortuitous, and arctic rather than amiable. His reputation for cold brilliance and colder manners had reached even her small, sheltered world in Bath. He was also, according to the brisk, businesslike correspondence from his steward, desperately in need of a governess for his 2 younger sisters after the last one had fled, reportedly citing atmospheric melancholia. Eleanor smoothed the worn wool of her skirts. She had no such luxury as melancholia. At 26, with no fortune and a past carefully sealed away behind a name that was not quite her own, this position was not just employment, it was a sanctuary. A place to be useful, invisible, and safe. The chaise shuddered to a halt. A footman materialized from the downpour, his expression as dour as the gargoyles leering from the gutters, and handed her down onto the gravel. She was ushered inside not by a butler, but by a stern-faced housekeeper, Mrs. Wickham, whose gaze took in Eleanor's sensible attire, her neat but unremarkable bonnet, and the single, modest trunk with a nod that seemed to denote satisfaction at her lack of pretension. "His Grace is in the library," Mrs. Wickham said, her voice like rustling parchment. "He wishes to see you directly." Eleanor's stomach tightened. She had hoped for a moment to breathe, to compose herself. "Of course," she said, her own voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. The library was a cathedral of knowledge and shadows. Countless books lined walls that soared to a vaulted ceiling lost in gloom. A fire roared in a cavernous hearth, but it did little to dispel the chill that seemed to emanate from the very stones. And before the fire, silhouetted against the flames, stood the Duke. He turned as she entered, and Eleanor felt the breath catch in her throat. Portraits did not do him justice. They captured the stark angles of his face, the blade of a nose, the slash of cheekbones, the severe, sculpted mouth, but they failed to capture the unsettling intensity of his presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in immaculate black and white that accentuated his lean power. His hair was the color of wet ink, swept back from a widow's peak. And his eyes. They were not the blue of a summer sky, as some foolish novels might describe, but the pale, piercing gray of a winter sea, assessing her with a dispassion that felt more intimate than any stare. "Miss Hartwell." His voice was deep, crisp, devoid of warmth. It was not a question. "Your Grace." She curtsied, lowering her gaze, the picture of respectable submission. "You come highly recommended by Mrs. Penwickley's agency. A paragon of virtue, learning, and discretion." He recited the phrase as if it were a dubious epitaph. "My sisters, Lady Cassandra and Lady Lydia, are spirited. Their education has been neglected. You will remedy this. You will teach them history, French, music, drawing, and most importantly, you will instill in them the decorum befitting their station. You will report to me on their progress every Friday at 4 o'clock. You will not coddle them. You will not indulge them in flights of fancy. Is that understood?" It was a speech, not a conversation. Eleanor lifted her chin a fraction. "I understand my duties, Your Grace. May I ask after the ages and current proficiencies of my charges?" A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed his granite features. "Cassandra is 17. Lydia 15. Their proficiencies, as you term them, are negligible. They can giggle, daydream, and scandalize the housemaids with their antics. Your task is to forge something worthwhile from such raw material." He took a step closer, and she caught the subtle scent of sandalwood and crisp linen. "You are not here to be their friend, Miss Hartwell. You are here to be their governess. The distinction is paramount. You may go. Mrs. Wickham will show you to your room and then to the schoolroom." The schoolroom, by contrast, was a sunlit chaos. Books were stacked haphazardly, sheet music spilled from a forte piano, and 2 whirlwinds in muslin dresses arrested their pacing to stare at the newcomer. Cassandra, the elder, possessed her brother's striking looks but none of his frost. Her dark hair was a riot of curls escaping their pins, and her eyes were a warm hazel, sparkling with curiosity and mischief. Lydia was softer, fairer, with a dreamy expression that suggested her thoughts were often leagues away. "You're the new dragon," Cassandra declared, hands on her hips. "The last one lasted a month." She said Blackwood Hall would suck the joy from her soul. Eleanor set down her satchel. "I am Miss Hartwell, and I have no intention of having my soul sucked, joyfully or otherwise. I propose a treaty." Lydia blinked. "A treaty?" "Dismissed." Eleanor curtsied again, her cheeks burning with a mixture of intimidation and defiance. "Your Grace." As she turned to leave, his voice halted her. "One more thing, Miss Hartwell. This is a large house, but my business is my own. You will confine yourself to the schoolroom, the girls' quarters, and the gardens immediately adjacent. My private study, the West Wing, and my personal affairs are not your concern. Discretion, as your reference noted, is paramount." The unspoken words hung in the air. "Know your place." Eleanor felt a spark ignite in her chest. "I am here to teach your sisters, Your Grace, not to pry into your business." She met his frosty gaze for a heartbeat longer than was proper before sweeping from the room, her back straight as a ruler. "Yes. You will grant me the respect due to my position and apply yourselves to your studies with at least a modicum of effort. In return, I shall not bore you to tears with dry recitations, and I shall endeavor to make our lessons engaging. Furthermore," she added, seeing the skepticism on Cassandra's face, "I shall argue for your inclusion in suitable local entertainments, should you demonstrate improved decorum." The sisters exchanged a glance. This was a new tactic. "What sort of entertainments?" Cassandra asked, suspicious. "A picnic, perhaps. Or a visit to the circulating library in the village. If your brother agrees." The mention of their brother sobered them. "Sebastian never agrees to anything fun," Lydia murmured. "Then we shall have to persuade him with irrefutable evidence of your transformation," Eleanor said, a plan already forming. "Now, let us begin by surveying the battlefield. Show me what you have been working on." Strich. The weeks settled into a rhythm. Mornings were for languages and history, afternoons for music and drawing. Eleanor discovered, to her delight, that Cassandra had a razor-sharp mind buried under her rebelliousness, and Lydia a genuine, if unfocused, talent for watercolors. They were not neglected so much as emotionally starved, marooned in this grand house with a brother who was more a distant, disapproving monarch than a guardian. Her weekly audiences with the Duke were exercises in glacial tension. Every Friday at 4, she would stand before him in the library, delivering her report in clipped, professional sentences. He would listen, his gaze never leaving her face, making sparse notes on a ledger. Lady Cassandra has mastered the French subjunctive but continues to argue its practical application in Northumberland. Lady Lydia's rendering of the Roman ruins is passable, though her perspective on the Colosseum is, I believe, more imaginative than archaeological. He never praised, only grunted or offered a curt, "See that it improves." Yet, Eleanor began to notice things. The way his eyes would linger on the nape of her neck when she looked down at her notes. The faint tightening of his jaw when she once, forgetting herself, used a particularly vivid turn of phrase about the Wars of the Roses. The fact that the tea tray, which never appeared for the first 3 weeks, now arrived punctually at 4:30, with 2 cups. One afternoon, a crisis erupted. Lydia, in a fit of poetic drama after reading Byron, decided to commune with the tempest and was caught halfway up an ancient oak in the storm-lashed garden. Eleanor, throwing propriety and her shawl to the wind, raced out to coax her down, finally climbing up herself to sit on the sodden branch beside the trembling girl, talking her down with a calm she did not feel. They returned to the house, drenched and muddy, to find the Duke blocking the terrace doors, a statue of pure, silent fury. Water streamed from Eleanor's hair, her gown was plastered to her skin, and her breath came in gasps. "What," he said, the word a shard of ice, "is the meaning of this?" "It was my fault, Sebastian." Lydia wept. "I just wanted to see the lightning." "Go to your room," he commanded, not taking his eyes off Eleanor. When the sniffling Lydia had fled, he took a step closer. The storm raged behind him. "You. In my study. Now." She followed him, the squelch of her boots loud in the silent hallway. In his study, A more intimate, intimidating room than the library, he turned on her. You were told to instill decorum, Miss Hartwell. Not to encourage theatrical folly that could have ended in a broken neck. I did not encourage it, Your Grace, she fired back, her own temper rising to meet his. I prevented it. She was terrified and stuck. Would you have had me leave her there to catch her death while I summoned a footman for a ladder? You climbed a tree. He said it with utter incredulity, his gaze sweeping her ruined form. The wet linen of her dress left little to the imagination, clinging to the curve of her hips, the swell of her breasts, the slender column of her thighs. She saw his eyes darken, the grey storming to slate. A flush, hot and unwelcome, spread up her neck. I did what was necessary to secure my charge's safety, she said, crossing her arms over her chest, suddenly, acutely aware of her body. You look like a drowned urchin, he muttered, but his voice had lost its edge. It was lower, rougher. He strode to a cabinet, pulled out a decanter of brandy, and poured 2 glasses with unsteady hands. He thrust one at her. Drink, before you take a chill. Their fingers brushed. A jolt, like lightning from the very storm outside, shot up her arm. She snatched her hand back, the glass nearly slipping. His gaze locked on hers, and for a long, charged moment, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the drumming rain. She saw something raw and hungry flicker in the winter-sea depths of his eyes before it was violently extinguished. You will take tomorrow to rest, Miss Hartwell, he said, turning his back to her, his shoulders rigid. See that this does not happen again. Strich. The incident changed something. The air between them, already charged, now crackled with a new, dangerous energy. He began to find reasons to be near the schoolroom. He would pass by when she was playing the forte piano, lingering in the doorway until the last note faded. He questioned her more closely during their Friday meetings, not just about the girls, but about her opinions on Rousseau's theories of education, about her thoughts on the landscape painters Turner and Constable. Eleanor, for her part, fought a desperate rearguard action against her own traitorous senses. She found herself listening for the sound of his boots in the hall. She noticed the way his coat stretched across his shoulders when he reached for a book. She dreamt of the scent of sandalwood and the startling heat of his hand against hers. It was a battle she was ill-equipped to fight. She, who had built a fortress of quiet competence around her heart, found its walls crumbling under a siege she had never anticipated. He was arrogant, high-handed, and often infuriating. But she had also seen the way his stern expression softened, just for a second, when Lydia presented him with a marginally improved watercolor. She had heard the rare, deep rumble of his laugh from the garden when Cassandra made a witty retort. And she had felt, unmistakably, the heat of his gaze on her when he thought she wasn't looking. The breaking point came with the arrival of the Marquis of Devereux. Julian Devereux was everything the Duke was not: charming, sunny, effortlessly graceful. A close friend from their Oxford days, he descended upon Blackwood Hall like a beam of golden light, bringing gossip from London, ridiculous gifts for the girls, and an easy camaraderie that made the great house feel lighter. He also, immediately and unreservedly, adored Eleanor. A governess who quotes Homer and has eyes the color of a stormy sky, he declared at dinner one evening, his smile dazzling. Blackwood, you dog, you've been hiding a treasure. The Duke, at the head of the table, had gone very still, his knuckles white around his wine glass. Miss Hartwell is here to teach, Devereux, not to provide poetic commentary. A tragedy for poetry, then, Julian laughed, turning his warm gaze on Eleanor. Tell me, Miss Hartwell, do you find the country terribly dull after Bath? The conversation flowed around her, Julian drawing her out with genuine interest. She was aware of the Duke's silence, a cold, heavy presence at the end of the table. Later, as she played for the company in the drawing room, she felt 2 pairs of eyes on her, one warm with open admiration, the other blazing with a heat that felt like possession. It was in the garden 2 days later that Julian found her alone, admiring the late-blooming roses. Miss Hartwell. Eleanor, he began, his usual levity replaced by a tender seriousness. These past days have been the brightest I've known in an age. You bring light and wit to this dusty old place. More than that, you bring it to me. Before she could respond, he took her hand. I know it is sudden, and I know my reputation as a flatterer precedes me. But this is no flirtation. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met.
Could you ever consider leaving service?
As my wife?
The world tilted.
A proposal. From a Marquis. It was security beyond her wildest dreams. A title, comfort, and a man who was kind, handsome, and clearly adored her. It was the answer to every unspoken prayer she'd made since her world had fallen apart. But as she looked into Julian's earnest, hopeful face, all she could see was another face, a stern, angular face with wintersea eyes that could turn stormy with suppressed passion. A face that belonged to a man who would never, could never, offer her such a thing.
Lord Devereux. Julian.
I am honored beyond words, she stammered, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. This is so unexpected. Don't answer now, he said, squeezing her hand. Think on it. Please. I shall speak to Blackwood, of course. Seek his blessing, as your guardian of sorts. He leaned in and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to her cheek before striding back towards the house, leaving her among the roses, her skin burning where his lips had touched, and her soul in utter turmoil. She did not know how long she stood there, frozen. The shadows lengthened. Then a voice, cold enough to freeze the very rose petals, cut through the twilight.
Well, Miss Hartwell. She whirled around.
The Duke stood on the gravel path, having witnessed the entire scene from the library terrace. His face was a mask of pale, controlled fury. Every line of his body was taut with it. It seems you have been productive.
Ah, Marquis.
A rather spectacular elevation from governess. Your Grace, I. Spare me your explanations, he hissed, closing the distance between them in 3 swift strides. He loomed over her, his anger a physical force. Devereux is a good man. A fine match. You must be delighted. All your careful respectability, your paragon of virtue performance, and it has netted you a prize beyond the dreams of avarice. His words were laced with a venom that stole her breath. It was not a performance. She cried, hurt and anger overriding caution. And I have given him no answer. Why ever not? He sneered, his eyes raking over her. Is the offer not generous enough? Do you hold out for a duke? The insult was so blatant, so cruel, it shattered the last of her composure.
You are insufferable.
You treat everyone around you as if they are inconveniences to be managed. You have given your sisters everything but love, and you have given me nothing but scorn and impossible, confusing. She broke off, panting. Impossible, confusing what? He demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the furious pulse at the base of his throat. Nothing, she said, trying to push past him. He caught her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. The contact sizzled through her. Tell me. Let me go.
Not until you tell me.
His gaze dropped to her mouth. The air between them vanished, replaced by a thick, combustible tension. All the unsaid words, the stolen glances, the repressed longing of months coalesced into this single, desperate moment. You confuse me, she whispered, the fight leaving her, replaced by a terrifying, thrilling vulnerability. You make me feel things I have no right to feel. Things a governess should not feel for her employer. A harsh, ragged breath escaped him. The anger in his eyes fractured, revealing a yawning chasm of raw, unchecked need.
What things, Eleanor?
He murmured, her name a sinful prayer on his lips. It was the final crack in the dam. She swayed towards him, an infinitesimal movement, but it was enough. With a groan that seemed torn from the depths of his soul, he closed the last gap between them. His mouth crashed down on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a conflagration. It was punishment and surrender, accusation and confession. His lips were demanding, possessive, slanting over hers with a fierce, hungry passion that stole the very ground from beneath her feet. She should have pushed him away. She should have been horrified. Instead, a moan escaped her, and she melted into him, her hands flying up to clutch the lapels of his coat, holding on as the world dissolved into sensation. He tasted of brandy and storm winds. His arms banded around her, crushing her to the hard, unyielding plane of his body. One hand tangled in her hair, dislodging its pins, while the other pressed into the small of her back, arching her against him. She could feel the evidence of his desire, hard and urgent, pressed against her belly, and a corresponding heat pooled low in her own. This was madness. This was ruin. This was everything she had ever secretly, shamefully longed for. When he finally tore his mouth from hers, they were both breathing as if they'd run a mile. His forehead rested against hers, his eyes closed, his chest heaving. The fading light gilded his skin, and he looked utterly ravaged, his control in ashes. Eleanor trembled, her lips swollen, her body humming with awakened desire. He opened his eyes, and the look in them was one of pure, unadulterated horror. Horror at himself, at his loss of control, at what he had done. He released her as if she had burned him, stumbling back a step. The cold evening air rushed in to fill the space where his heat had been, making her shiver. That, he said, his voice hoarse and shattered, should not have happened. He dragged a hand through his hair, the picture of a man undone. Devereux is a good man. He will make you an excellent husband. You will accept his offer. He turned on his heel and strode back to the house, leaving her alone in the gathering dark, the taste of him on her lips, and the devastating certainty in her heart. The Duke of Blackwood did have feelings for her. And he would rather see her married to another man than ever acknowledge them. The week that followed was a peculiar form of torture. Blackwood Hall, once a place of subtle, simmering tension, now felt like a gilded prison. The Duke became a ghost. He took his meals in his study, ceased his lurking near the schoolroom, and when business forced him into her presence, he was more frigidly polite than ever, his winter-sea eyes skimming over her as if she were a piece of furniture. The kiss in the garden might have been a fever dream, save for the way her body remembered it, a constant, humming echo in her blood. Julian, by contrast, was a persistent, charming sunbeam. He sought her out for walks, brought her books of poetry, and his looks of tender affection were a stark contrast to the Duke's glacial avoidance. He had, he told her gently, spoken to Blackwood. He gave his blessing, Julian said, his hand over hers on the garden bench. Though he was rather curt about it. Typical Sebastian. But it is settled from his perspective. The path is clear, my dear Eleanor.
Say you will walk it with me.
Eleanor's heart felt like a lead weight. The path was clear: safety, respectability, a kind husband. A life free from servitude and secret yearning. It was everything she was supposed to want. Yet, every time she opened her mouth to say yes, the word died on her tongue, strangled by the memory of a punishing kiss and the image of a man fleeing from his own desire. Her charges noticed the change. Sebastian's in a fouler mood than usual, Cassandra observed one afternoon as they worked on Italian translations.
And you look like you've seen a ghost, Miss Hartwell. Did Julian propose?
Is that it? Eleanor flushed, dropping her quill. Lord Devereux has made a very honourable offer. Lydia's eyes went round. And will you accept? You'd be a marchioness. And you'd leave us. Her voice held a note of panic. I have not yet given my answer, Eleanor said quietly, the confession aching in her throat. Don't go, Lydia whispered, impulsively grasping her hand. Please. It's been so much better since you came. Cassandra, ever more perceptive, studied her governess face. It's not Julian you want, is it? She said, her voice low and knowing. Eleanor stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. That is quite enough, Lady Cassandra. Our focus, please, is on the subjunctive mood. The crisis erupted from an unexpected quarter. A letter arrived for the Duke, bearing an insignia that made Mrs. Wickham's lips purse. It required, the messenger insisted, an immediate, personal reply. The Duke was out, riding the Far Tenants' farms. The steward was in the village. Protocol dictated the letter be placed in the Duke's study to await his return. Mrs. Wickham, her hands full with a domestic dispute below stairs, pressed the sealed missive into Eleanor's hands.
Take it to the study, Miss Hartwell. Lay it on the blotter. Do not linger. Eleanor's skin prickled. The Duke's private sanctum was forbidden territory.
But an order was an order. She climbed the stairs to the west wing, her pulse quickening with each step. The door to his study was ajar. She pushed it open. The room was profoundly, intimately his. It smelled of leather, old paper, and the faint, lingering scent of his sandalwood. Books and ledgers were piled with precise chaos on a massive oak desk. A globe stood in one corner, a worn leather armchair by the fire. It felt like stepping inside his mind. She crossed quickly to the desk and laid the letter on the green leather blotter. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught on a small, framed miniature that sat half-tucked behind a stack of parliamentary reports. It was a portrait of a young woman with laughing eyes and chestnut curls. And it was her. Not her as Eleanor Hartwell, but her as Eloise Barrington. The self she had buried 5 years ago. The floor dropped out from beneath her. She snatched up the miniature, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. How? Why? Eloise Barrington was gone, disgraced, her family ruined by scandal and debt. She had died in all ways that mattered, and Eleanor Hartwell had been painstakingly born from the ashes. Footsteps, firm and quick, sounded in the hall. Panic, pure and instinctive, seized her. She shoved the miniature back, but it was too late. The Duke stood in the doorway, his riding clothes damp from the mist, his gaze taking in the scene, her frozen by his desk, guilt written in every line of her body. His eyes flicked to the displaced miniature, then back to her face. The cold mask head worn for a week shattered, replaced by a look of stark, unvarnished shock. "What are you doing in here?" "Mrs. Wickham. A letter required." She stammered, backing away from the desk. He strode into the room, shutting the door behind him with a soft, definitive click. The sound echoed like a tomb seal. "You were looking at the portrait." It was not a question. She could not lie. The evidence was in her terrified eyes. I was. You recognize her."
He advanced slowly, like a hunter cornering prey.
The air grew thick, charged with the electricity of a terrible truth about to break.
"No, don't."
The word was a whip crack. He stopped a few feet away, his chest rising and falling with a suppressed emotion so powerful it vibrated in the space between them. "I have known since the day you arrived." The references from Bath were a little too perfect. The discreet, accomplished governess with no past. "I made inquiries." The Barrington scandal was not so easily forgotten, even if the daughter was. She felt the blood drain from her face. She swayed, and her hand flew to the desk for support. "You knew?" "I knew Eloise Barrington had vanished. I knew a woman matching her description had appeared in Bath under a new name."
"When Mrs. Penwickley sent you?"
"I had to see for myself." His gaze burned into her.
"The eyes. You have your mother's eyes."
"The same defiance in them, even when you're curtsying."
Tears blurred her vision.
The carefully constructed fortress of Eleanor Hartwell crumbled to dust, leaving only exposed, raw Eloise. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you not send me away?"
"Expose me?"
A muscle ticked in his jaw. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at her as if trying to decipher a complex code. "At first, I told myself it was for my sisters. They responded to you. You were competent. Then," he raked a hand through his hair, the gesture agonized. "Then I told myself it was a curious puzzle. A woman of gentle birth, educated, refined, hiding as a servant. I wanted to understand why." "You know why," she said bitterly, the old shame a fresh wound. "My father's debts. The disgrace. The proposals I had to refuse from men who thought my downfall made me available for less honorable arrangements." She swallowed hard. There was nothing left. Eleanor Hartwell was a chance to live quietly, with dignity. Dignity. He repeated the word as if it were foreign. "And you think marrying Devereux will give you that?
A return to the world that cast you out?"
"It is a chance at security. At a life." She cried, her composure breaking. "What would you have me do? Remain here, forever your sister's governess, tormented by a man who cannot decide if he wishes to insult me or what, Eleanor?" He challenged, his voice dropping to a raw, intimate rasp. He closed the final distance between them. "Or kiss you until you forget your own name. Until you forget you are supposed to be a governess and I am supposed to be a duke who feels nothing?" Her breath hitched. He was so close. The heat and scent of him overwhelmed her senses. "You made your feelings perfectly clear. You told me to marry Julian. I was a coward." The admission erupted from him, violent and desperate. "I saw him offer you everything I could not. open admiration, a clear path, a name unsullied by scandal. I, who am responsible for this family, for its legacy, who has spent a lifetime building walls to keep the world and its messy emotions out. I saw him offer you freedom, and I hated him for it. And I hated myself more for wanting to chain you here, in the shadows with me. His words hung in the air, devastating and beautiful. Eleanor stared up at him, seeing not the forbidding Duke, but a man at war, his defenses in ruins. What are you saying? She breathed. I am saying that the day you climbed that damn tree, soaked and fearless, was the day I was lost. I am saying that your mind challenges mine, your spirit infuriates and delights me, and the sight of you in Devereux's arms, even in mere friendship, feels like a physical wound. He raised a hand, his fingers hovering near her cheek, not quite touching. I am saying that I have never wanted anything, in my life as recklessly, as completely as I want you. A tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek.
Sebastian.
The sound of his name on her lips broke the last of his control. With a groan of surrender, he captured her mouth with his. This kiss was different from the first. It was not a clash of anger and passion, but a slow, deep, soul-searing revelation. It was a confession, an apology, a claiming. His lips moved over hers with a desperate tenderness that unraveled her completely. She kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of 100 silent days, her hands sliding up to tangle in the dark silk of his hair. He walked her backwards until the edge of the desk met her hips, then lifted her, seating her upon it, never breaking the kiss. He stood between her parted knees, his hands framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. The world narrowed to the taste of him, the feel of his strong body pressed against the inside of her thighs, the low, hungry sounds vibrating in his chest. When he finally pulled back, both of them were breathless, foreheads pressed together. Eloise, he murmured, the name she had forsaken a benediction on his lips.
My brave, impossible Eloise.
You cannot call me that, she whispered, though she wanted to hear nothing else. In this room, you are Eloise. Here, with me, you are not a governess and I am not just a duke. He kissed her again, softly, on the corner of her mouth. Marry me. She jerked back, her eyes flying open. What? Marry me, he repeated, his gaze steady, fierce with certainty. Not as a governess marrying above her station, but as Eloise Barrington, daughter of a viscount, however disgraced. I don't care about the scandal. I will face it down. I will rebuild your family's name if I have to. Marry me. The enormity of it threatened to drown her. Your sisters. Your position.
The ton.
They will crucify you. Let them try. A ruthless, ducal arrogance flashed in his eyes, but it was tempered by a love so profound it stole her breath. I have spent my life upholding duty and tradition.
For once, I choose passion.
I choose you.
The world can go to the devil.
It was madness.
Glorious, breathtaking madness.
And looking into his eyes, seeing the love he had fought so hard to deny now shining there, bright and unwavering, she knew her own heart. She had known it in the garden, when his kiss felt like a homecoming.
Julian,
she said weakly, a last remnant of conscience. Will be heartbroken. And will recover. He is my friend, and he will understand in time, that this was inevitable. He traced her lower lip with his thumb.
Say yes, Eloise.
Please. She saw it all then, not just the passion but the partnership.
The lonely duke and the hidden gentlewoman.
Two souls who had built fortresses, finding in each other the one person worth surrendering for. A slow, radiant smile broke through her tears. Yes, she whispered. Then, stronger, filled with a joy so profound it was almost painful. Yes, Sebastian.
I will marry you.
The sound that left him was half laugh, half sob of relief. He crushed her to him, burying his face in her neck, holding her as if he would never let go. Then his mouth found hers again, and this kiss was pure, triumphant fire. It was not the careful, polite kiss of a Regency courtship. It was the kiss of a man claiming his destiny. His hands slid from her face, down her neck, over the modest fabric of her gown. When they cupped her breasts, she gasped into his mouth, arching into his touch. The thin muslin was no barrier. She could feel the heat of his palms, the teasing brush of his thumbs over her nipples, which tightened into aching peaks. Sebastian, she breathed, her head falling back as his lips left her mouth to blaze a trail down her throat. "We shouldn't." "We will," he growled against her skin, his fingers deftly working the buttons of her dress. "You are mine.
Mine to adore. Mine to cherish."
The bodice loosened, and he pushed it down, along with her chemise, bearing her to the waist. The cool air of the study, and the heat of his gaze, made her shiver. "Mine to worship." He lowered his head and took one taut peek into his mouth. The sensation was so exquisite, so shockingly intimate, that a cry was torn from her. Her hands flew to his hair, holding him to her as he laved and suckled, his other hand gently kneading her other breast. Pleasure, sharp and sweet, arrowed straight to her core, which grew damp and heavy with need. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, switching his attentions, lavishing the same exquisite torture on her other breast. "I have dreamt of this. Of tasting you. Of seeing you come apart from me." His words, so raw and carnal, fanned the flames inside her. She was molten, every nerve ending alight. Her hips moved restlessly against the hard edge of the desk, seeking friction. Understanding her need, he slid a hand down her stomach, over the fabric of her skirts, until his fingers found the heated junction of her thighs. Even through the layers, the pressure of his hand made her whimper. He rubbed in slow, firm circles. His eyes locked on hers, watching her unravel. "Please," she begged, not even knowing what she was asking for. With a swift, decisive motion, he gathered her skirts in his hands, pushing them up to her waist.
The cool leather of the blatter met her bare thighs.
He knelt before her, his eyes dark with smoldering desire as he beheld her most intimate self.
"Sebastian!"
she cried, shocked, trying to close her legs. "Shoo," he soothed, pressing a kiss to her inner thigh.
"Let me love you, Eloise.
All of you." And then his mouth was on her, and the world exploded. The sensation was unlike anything she could have imagined. Intimate, decadent, overwhelmingly intense. His tongue stroked and explored her with a relentless, worshipful precision that shattered every last vestige of thought. She cried out, her fingers gripping his hair as waves of pleasure crashed over her, building and building until she broke with a sharp, sobbing gasp, her body convulsing around the exquisite torment of his mouth. He held her through the storm, gentling her with his lips and hands until the last tremor subsided. Then he rose, looming over her, his own need evident in the fierce lines of his face and the hard bulge straining against his breeches. He kissed her deeply, letting her taste herself on his lips. "I want to be inside you," he rasped against her mouth, his voice thick with desire. "But not here. Not like this, for the first time." He rested his forehead against hers, his breath coming in ragged gusts as he fought for control. "When I take you, it will be in a bed, and I will have all night to learn every sigh, every whisper.
Tonight."
The promise in his words sent a fresh thrill through her. He carefully helped her down from the desk, his hands tender as he rearranged her clothing, fastening buttons with a reverence that made her heart ache. He pressed a soft kiss to her swollen lips.
"Go to your room. Pack what you need.
I will deal with Devereux."
We leave for Gretna Green at midnight." "Gretna Green?"
she gasped. "I will not risk a license, or a chance for anyone to take you from me. We marry now. The rest can follow." He cupped her face.
"Do you trust me?"
Looking into the eyes of the man who had seen her secret, who had fought his own nature for her, who had chosen her against all reason, she knew the answer with absolute certainty. "With my life."
Strich.
The scene in the drawing room that evening was one of excruciating tension. Julian, having been summoned by his friend, stood by the fireplace, his usual sunny demeanor clouded with confusion. The Duke stood before the mantel, his posture rigid, but his hand, Eleanor saw, was trembling slightly where it rested on the marble. "Julian," the Duke began, his voice uncharacteristically hoarse. "I owe you the deepest apology a friend can offer.
I have behaved dishonorably."
Julian's eyes flicked to Eleanor, who stood quietly by the window, then back to his friend.
"Sebastian, what is this?" "Miss Hartwell, Eloise,
has done me the honor of agreeing to become my wife.
We leave for Scotland tonight."
The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Julian's face went pale, then flushed with a complex mix of hurt, betrayal, and dawning understanding. He looked from one to the other, and in their faces, the Duke's defiant devotion, Eleanor's silent plea for forgiveness, he saw the truth. "I see," he said quietly, after a long, painful moment. He swallowed hard, a gentleman to his core even in his heartbreak. "Then, I congratulate you both." He looked directly at Eleanor, his smile sad but genuine. "He is a lucky man, Eleanor. Frightfully bad at showing it, but he loves you. I knew he did. I just hoped." He shrugged, the gesture elegant and wounded.
"I will take my leave in the morning."
"Julian," the Duke started, taking a step forward, genuine remorse in his eyes.
"No, Sebastian."
Julian held up a hand. "Do not apologize again. Love is not always civil. Just be happy.
The pair of you.
Or I shall have to call you out after all." He managed a weak smile, bowed to Eleanor, and left the room, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. The Duke turned to her, the weight of his friend's pain in his eyes. She went to him, taking his hand. "He will be all right," she whispered. "I know," he said, lifting her hand to his lips. "But it is a poor way to repay a friendship." "Come. The carriage awaits." The journey north was a blur of darkness, whispered conversations, and stolen kisses in the swaying confines of the coach. They were married at dawn by a blacksmith, the simple, swift ceremony binding them with a solemnity that a London society wedding could never match. She was no longer Eleanor Hartwell, governess. She was Eloise, Duchess of Blackwood. They did not return to Blackwood Hall immediately. Sebastian took her to a small, secluded hunting lodge on his northern estates. For 3 days and 3 nights, the outside world ceased to exist. On their first night, in a bedroom dominated by a large bed piled with furs, he made good on his promise. He undressed her slowly, by firelight, his eyes dark with awe as he revealed each new inch of skin. He worshipped her with his hands and his mouth, learning her body until she was pleading and trembling. And when he finally sheathed himself within her, the brief flash of pain was swallowed by a sense of rightness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "My love," he whispered, moving within her with a slow, deep rhythm that stoked the fire anew. "My Duchess. My Eloise." Their joining was a conversation more intimate than any they had ever had, a giving, a taking, a perfect fusion of body and soul. When the final, shattering release took them, it was together, their cries mingling in the firelit dark, 2 solitary hearts finally, irrevocably home. Their return to Blackwood Hall a fortnight later was met with predictable uproar. The news had raced ahead of them. The scandal sheets were ablaze. The Ice Duke melts for disgraced governess.
Blackwood's mad dash to Gretna.
But standing on the steps of the hall, his arm a solid, unshakable presence around her waist, Sebastian faced it all down with a cold ducal stare that silenced the murmuring servants. Inside, Cassandra and Lydia flew at them, their faces a comical mix of shock and glee.
"You married her?"
Cassandra shrieked, before throwing her arms around Eleanor. "Thank heavens. Now you can stay forever." Lydia was weeping happy tears. "I knew it.
I just knew you didn't want Julian."
Later, as they walked in the now tranquil garden, the memory of their first kiss lingering like perfume among the roses, Sebastian pulled her into his arms. "There will be talk. There will be cuts. Some doors may never open to us," he said, his chin resting on her head. She looked up at him, her stormy eyes clear and unafraid. "Do you care?" A slow, genuine smile, the one she cherished more than any jewel, spread across his face. It transformed him from the forbidding Duke into the man she loved. "Not even a little bit. I have the only door that matters right here." He kissed her, soft and deep, a promise for all their tomorrows. In the end, the Duke who didn't like to acknowledge his feelings had done more than acknowledge them. He had surrendered to them completely. And the governess who came to teach his sisters had taught the master of the house the most valuable lesson of all, that the greatest strength lies not in icy control, but in the brave, wild, glorious surrender to loved. The Yendi. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe so that we are encouraged to keep bringing you more of these stories. Moral of the story. True strength is found not in the walls we build to protect ourselves, but in the courage to tear them down for love. The greatest dignity comes not from societal approval, but from embracing one's truth and choosing a partner who sees and cherishes your whole, authentic self.